Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the splashdown of the Crew-11 mission, marking the tail end of this first medical evacuation for NASA in its 25 years of continuous human presence on board the International Space Station. I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. It's good to be with you here in the early morning hours here on the East Coast and across the country here in the United States as Crew-11 prepares to splash down off the coast of California. Time here is 2:19 a.m., so 11:19 a.m. on the West Coast. And once again, we are joined by our friend and colleague from CBS News, their Houston-based space reporter, Gina Sinceri. Gina, good morning.
Are again just a few hours later. You wonder if the crew naps at all on this return home. But no, we're here at the Johnson Space Center. I drove by Mission Control and the parking lot's packed there, and no coffee shops were open on my way in. So, that was a little bit of a downer, but we know how that goes. But no, so the crew is on their way home, and we're waiting for the deorbit burn. And then I think I'm hearing sound. Should I let us take the audio from NASA or keep going?
We'll come to their audio here in just a moment, but just to set the scene for everybody, the poll for going into the deorbit burn was granted just moments ago by Mission Control, so they'll be
Hmm.
stepping into that procedure here in the latter part of the hour. The deorbit burn is set to last about 13 minutes and 15 seconds, and that'll set the stage for the entry for the Crew-11 quartet. Three astronauts, two from NASA, one from Japan, and a Roscosmos cosmonaut are making their way back to Earth after roughly 10 and a half hour transit between their departure from the space station and when they're set to splash down off the coast of California at 3:41 a.m. Eastern Time, 12:41 a.m. there on the West Coast. So, following the deorbit burn, about 36 or so minutes before splashdown, is when the Dragon trunk will be jettisoned and expose the heat shield. You're taking a look at the entry map here as created by SpaceX, this graphic, which for those of you who are on the West Coast, you may get a nice treat in seeing that reentry, which is quite a spectacle, especially given a nighttime entry. You should see what essentially looks like a comet streaking across the sky, but very, very bright if it's clear for you. And that'll mark the entry for Crew-11, potentially accompanied by a sonic boom if you're in the right part of the proximity to the Dragon spacecraft. Following the jettison of the Dragon trunk, about 4 minutes after that, the nose cone is closed at the top of the Dragon capsule. And then there's about 30 minutes or so before the parachute opening sequence begins. Roughly 4 minutes before Dragon's set to touch down in the waters of the Pacific Ocean, the drogue parachutes will deploy. That's followed up by the main parachutes deploying about a minute after the drogues open up. And then finally, splashdown. Again, currently set to happen at about 3:41 a.m. Eastern, 12:41 a.m. Pacific time. Gina, obviously, besides the fact that this has been an accelerated return of the Crew-11 contingent, a lot of this has really looked pretty standard for Dragon recoveries, as we were talking about yesterday. But for folks who may not have had a chance to watch our coverage, just your thoughts about how this whole process has unfolded since we first learned last Thursday, as a matter of fact, that Crew-11 was coming home. It was only a week ago.
Yeah, very, very early in the morning, we got that alert from NASA that this was on the table, bringing the crew home early. And I think none of us had ever seen that kind of verbiage before. We're thinking about bringing the crew home early. They have the capability because the Dragon that brought them there was at the station. We all know on the space station they always have lifeboat stock. So, and the crew had been there for 100. I think it's going to be 167 days. So while the mission shortened, they accomplished a lot of their goals. But this was just not something we'd ever heard of before in 25 years of missions back and forth to the space station. So while it was accelerated, they know how to do this. they've done this now. This will be Crew-11, so 12 times, including the first Bob and Doug mission. So this is something that they've got in their wheelhouse, and it's, I hate to say routine. Nothing's routine about space travel, but they're landing in the dark off the Pacific coast. The weather's is good. We need that ocean to be almost nearly flat for Dragon to come down. And we'll be curious to see what kind of video we get this morning compared to the video we've gotten in the past. It will be dark, and the boats will be there waiting to get to the capsule and safe the capsule and then tow it back to the recovery ship.
Yeah, we know that the Dragon recovery vessel did set sail yesterday in support of the recovery efforts for Dragon. Uh, Actually, we can go now to some live picture, just taking a look inside mission control for SpaceX there, as the Dragon has been separate from the International Space Station for some time. The SpaceX folks are largely in the driver's seat right now as the Dragon spacecraft is flying largely autonomously. This is mostly a hands-off operation for the crew, so kind of a
Mm-hmm.
nice entry back to Earth after, as you mentioned, more than 160 days in low Earth orbit. And of course, they have their engineers who's communicating directly to the Dragon spacecraft and letting the crew know what's coming up, when it's happening, and if there's anything that the crew needs to communicate back to the ground, they can do so through one central point there on the ground at the, both the Johnson Space Center as well as at the SpaceX facilities in Hawthorne, California. And Gina, to your point, this is become fairly routine for SpaceX. I mean, like I said, nothing is ever truly routine when it comes to human spaceflight. But being that this is Crew-11, they've done this 11 times now with long duration missions to the space station. Bob and Doug was the start of all of this for crewed flights, the ISS. But they've also had the opportunity to work with different customers and different flows with the private astronaut
Mm-hmm.
missions, which here to date
Yes.
have all been flown by Axiom Space, also based where you're right now in Houston, Texas. And
All right.
so SpaceX has had a lot of opportunity to fly
And right.
customers, to station into low Earth orbit in a non-destination operation like with Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn, both of Jared Isaacman's missions, and of course the most recently flown Fram
Mhm.
2, that polar orbit mission.
Right. That true, and we'll see. We'll hear from Jared Isaacman later this morning. I know he flew into Houston. He's planning to be at the Kennedy Space Center for the Artemis rollout later this week. And like we said, nothing's actually ever truly routine, but it'll be curious to see how much video we get. We've seen all four astronauts; they seem to be healthy. But looks can be deceiving. Will they make a detour to a hospital there? There at San Diego, there's a huge naval base there. Or will they get on the NASA Gulfstream and fly directly here to Houston?
Yeah, that'll definitely be an interesting question to ask Administrator Isaacman, whether we get comments about that during NASA's coverage of Splashdown here, which will bring in their audio in just a little bit. But, certainly will be interesting to see. The crew member has been stable, as NASA has reiterated a number of
Mm-hmm.
times, and we didn't see anything that outwardly looked to be wrong when we saw the crew both during their change of command ceremony as well as getting into the Dragon spacecraft and making their departure from the space station. So, no visible signs of distress, which is certainly good. We want our astronauts to
Mm-hmm.
be healthy and to have as nominal of a space flight as possible. So, the fact that, as the chief medical officer, Dr. Polk, said, the fact that this is the first time that they're having to do this in 25 years is quite remarkable and goes against the model that had predicted, maybe once every 3 years or so,
Mm-hmm.
you should have something like this. But they've been able to mitigate it through various trainings that they do before they fly. Obviously, they have lots of backstops on the space station and the communications with the ground, the flight surgeons that are on standby there at the Johnson Space Center. So, Gina, it's a robust web of support systems that the astronauts have. As they say, this is a big team sport, as Mike Finke said in his closing remarks before leaving station.
It is indeed a team support, and when you see the number of people who are here to support human spaceflight, you certainly get that. It was interesting listening to Dr. Polk last week because this is a learning opportunity for NASA. You know, they have an astronaut they did not think they could treat or get the right services on the space station, and they do have medical support on the space station. But this is an opportunity for them to learn what can they do to for missions when we're on the moon for longer periods of time. And then, of course, the big goal someday is to send a crew to Mars. So these are hurdles they need to overcome, and they need to figure out how to make this work. And he talked about the Monte Carlo numbers. That was something that really piqued my interest on what they're looking at in treating these astronauts in the future.
Absolutely. And right now we're getting a visual outside of the International Space Station, now freshly devoid of the Crew-11 quartet. Just one American astronaut's remaining on station right now, and we haven't seen this combo of just three astronauts holding down the fort since the crew was expanded back in May of 2009. So this is sort of an interesting throwback to a now bygone era of low Earth orbit space habitation. The fewest humans that have been stationed on their respective stations that we've seen in some time between the three astronauts that are right now at the space station and the three taikonauts that are over at the Tiangong space station for
Mhm.
China. So it's a little sparse in low Earth orbit. It's an interesting time right now.
Very interesting. It's when, and we're sort of on the cusp because we talked a little bit about this that NASA is now threading the needle of getting ready to deorbit the space station, but they still have to maintain the space station and keep it operational. There are a lot of companies coming up that want to change to inherit the space station and go with commercial space. We talked about Axiom. There's Vast. So there's a lot out there that we're just on the cusp of this, and we'll see who's going to inherit this legacy.
Yeah, and of course we've also got Starlab, which has a lot of different companies backing
Yes.
them.
Yeah.
Starlab is a subsidiary of Voyager Industries, and they've got a lot of interesting partners with their space station proposal, including folks like Hilton Hotels, the Ohio State University, and
Yes.
Palantir. So there's a lot of players who
Yes.
haven't traditionally
There's money
been
there.
putting dollars up into low Earth orbit that we're going to be seeing, jockeying for not just the opportunity to fly NASA astronauts, but their own private astronauts. And, all these companies, and this, Gina, but for our audience, they all have
Yeah.
at least one astronaut on staff as their lead
Hmm.
to provide insight and information for how they're developing these, low Earth orbit destinations so that, they have an understanding of both, crew comfort and the things that astronauts like, but also the things that engineers on the ground wouldn't necessarily think to include. Like if
Hmm.
I'm floating from, this part of a module to that part, do I want a handrail here? Would I, need to
Right.
bounce off of this port? And should this, have, if it's going to have buttons that are, depressible, should there be little guards on them so I don't accidentally push
Right.
something, super sensitive? All of those little bits of minutia need to be considered when, imagining these commercial space stations. And, thankfully, folks like Drew Feustel with Vast and Michael Lopez Alegria
Hmm.
and
And Peggy
others
Whitson.
over at
Yeah.
Axiom. Yeah, they're all giving their insight and information. So as these stations come online, they are places that astronauts will want to go.
Yes. And, the lunar rover that we drove at IM, those big punch buttons, that astronauts want something kind of physical that they can work with when they're operating equipment and not everything as a touchscreen, which is sort of a throwback.
Yeah, there's something kind of nice about having a tactile feel to a button. You want to, have that
Mhm.
response of if I flip a switch, I feel the switch move, and so I know something has,
Right.
physically happened and is about to change on station. Um, you mentioned Dr. Polk's comments last week as we were hearing about, this crew's medical issue for the first time directly from NASA personnel. want to go to a bit of that tape as we're awaiting the deorbit burn to take place. So let's go ahead and listen back to just a week ago these comments from NASA's chief health officer.
As many of you know, we have a very robust suite of medical hardware on board the International Space Station, but we don't have the complete amount of hardware that I would have in the emergency department, for example, to complete a workup of a patient. And in this particular incident, that the medical incident was sufficient enough that we were concerned about the astronaut, that we would like to complete that workup. And the best way to complete that workup is on the ground, where we have the full suite of medical testing hardware. Now, again, because the astronaut is absolutely stable, this is not an emergent evacuation. We're not immediately disembarking and getting the astronaut down. But it leaves that lingering risk and lingering question as to what that diagnosis is, and that means there's some lingering risk for that astronaut on board. And so always we err on the side of the astronaut's health and welfare, and in this particular case we are doing the same. And I should reiterate, in our 25-year history of the International Space Station, we've had many models and Monte Carlo analysis models that have said we should have had a medical evacuation approximately every 3 years in that 25-year history, and we've not had one to date. And even in this case, we're erring on the side of caution. Again, it's not an emergent evacuation, but we are erring on the side of caution for the crew member and in their best interest and in their best medical welfare.
And again, that was Dr. Polk, the Chief Health and Medical Officer for NASA, giving a brief overview as to why the crew is coming home early instead of allowing them to stay until next month, when they would have had a direct handover to the Crew-12 coming in, including folks like NASA astronaut Jessica Meir, who is the commander of that mission, a seasoned astronaut in her own right, coming back to the station. And Gina, it's going to be a busy time for Crew-12 once they get on board station. Not only do they have to get caught up to speed with the expertise of only Chris Williams on board station, and hearing from Crew-11 on the ground, and obviously all the people that support them here at the Johnson Space Center and elsewhere in the country and around the world. But they are also, going to be taking over those spacewalks that we were expecting to have both last week and today. As right now we're on Thursday, January 15th. Mm-hmm. Today was supposed to be the second of two planned spacewalks to kick off 2026. Both had to be punted because of this medical evacuation, and presumably both will be on the table for the incoming crew fairly soon. So it's going to be a busy time for them. And in NASA's announcement, they mentioned they'll be spending 9 months aboard the station. So the longest that we've seen intentionally for one of these commercial crew missions that have flown to the International Space Station so far.
And this is kind of a quirky note, but Jessica Meir launching on Crew-12, Christina Cook launching on Artemis 2, and they were on the space station together, and actually, remember, did the first spacewalk by two women. Delayed a little bit because of spacesuit sizing issues, but they'll both be in space in different places because February is going to be a busy launch month. Crew-12 as well as Artemis. You've got the rollout, Artemis 2 rollout coming up this weekend. So there's a lot on the table at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And does present, sort of a nice bit of serendipity at that point, considering that, NASA is likely going to have some type of communication between the Orion spacecraft close to the moon, back with the International Space Station. So it'll be a nice moment for these two astronauts to once again be in space together, but separate in this once again historic moment. So it's a nice feather in the cap for both Jessica and Christina.
And they are, I think they go, yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. And it's interesting because we should be hearing from the crew soon. They go into quarantine a couple of weeks before their launch, Crew-12 will, and I know we'll get an opportunity to talk to them before they launch. So I expect that we'll hear from Jessica about that, really the timing of being in space at the same time, we hope, as her friend and colleague, Christina Cook.
Yeah, and in the run up to rollout, or actually as rollout is happening on Saturday, the four astronauts of the Artemis 2 mission will be here at the Kennedy Space Center alongside Administrator Isaacman. So we'll have the opportunity to talk with them directly. So time permitting, that'll be a good chance to ask Christina, given this bit of serendipity that have shuffled schedules around, the both of you will be in space. What is that going to be like for you? Having this historic communication from Orion to space station. Lots of interesting things to ask the crew about as they watch their ticket to ride make the 4 mile journey from the vehicle assembly building out to the pad at Launch Complex 39A. So should be a fun morning. It'll start early. 7 o'clock is when rollout is set to begin Eastern time. So we'll of course have live coverage for you then and bring you all the visuals of the 322-foot tall rocket emerging for the first time in this launch campaign. Should be fun. Speaking of the fun getting started, we're just about at 2:40 a.m. Eastern Time here on the East Coast, about 11:40 a.m. over on the West Coast. Just bringing up our timeline of operations here again. We're coming up to the deorbit burn, which it should happen around 50 minutes ahead of splashdown. Again, then the Dragon trunk set to jettison from the rest of the module there, the crew capsule. The nose cone will be closed just a few minutes after that, roughly 32 minutes prior to splashdown. Again, this is according to the SpaceX published timeline that was issued before we got down to the process of the deorbit burn, so things may have shifted ever so slightly. But generally speaking, the drogues will deploy about T-minus 4 minutes, the mains about a minute after that, and then we'll see splashdown in the waters of the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Southern California near to San Diego. Not too far away, really, from where the Artemis 2 mission will splash down after their 10-day jaunt around the moon and back. And so, as we're awaiting some further updates from NASA here, we're roughly 5 minutes from the start of deorbit, according to the latest that we're getting from NASA for the deorbit sequence, I should say, just to be super specific. Of course, we love specificity here at Spaceflight Now. Want to make sure we've got the very latest and most accurate information to you. And speaking of the U, I see we've got a little more than 1,200 folks watching along with us live this morning. So thanks to either the West Coast folks who have stayed up late or the East Coasters who got up early. I know we've also got a global audience, so sound off from where you're watching from. If you're here with us in the United States or elsewhere around the country, it's always great to see where you're checking in from. And just want to give a quick thank you to our moderators who are up with us this morning as well, Jeff Hansen, and one of our channel members, Cumulus Granatus, who's able to help answer folks' questions in the chat as well. You're looking live now back into the two rooms where it's happening. On the left-hand side, the Mission Control Center at SpaceX facilities in Hawthorne, California. On the right is Mission Control Center Houston at the Johnson Space Center, where, of course, if you're just joining us, we're watching the return of Crew-11 in progress, the tail end of the very first medical evacuation from the International Space Station that has been necessitated in its 25 years of continuous human presence. We're looking now at the live tracking map of the station compared to the Dragon capsule. You can see both are traveling right now between the southernmost tip of the continent of Africa and Antarctica down there at the bottom of the globe. Of course, we're coming up to the start of the deorbit sequence. Again, there will be a roughly 13-minute, 15-second retrograde deorbit burn to help dramatically slow the capsule down in preparation for the release of the trunk, which will no longer be needed, and the start of the nose cone. And Gina, this is, we've seen now a couple of West Coast returns of the Dragon capsule, but this was an important change that both NASA and SpaceX wanted to make for Dragon return, since they were getting reports, credible reports, of pieces of the trunk landing where they didn't want it to. Intentionally, they try to make sure that this all happens so that any surviving debris from the Dragon trunk gets put in either uninhabitable areas like the Pacific Ocean or other safe bodies of water, but they had some chunks of Dragon showing up on land and potentially creating hazardous situations. So they moved all of the recovery operations back out west like they were back in the original days of Dragon returns. And, so far it seems to have been an effective change for them.
And they've got a lot of support in the West. San Diego, the naval bases there, a lot of military support should they need it. And of course, SpaceX is headquartered in Hawthorne. I mean, once, the deorbit burn is finished, then as you mentioned, the Dragon's nose cone is closed, then it will maneuver to its entry attitude. And then we get the predicted blackout when we don't know. And we just wait for a while. And then we have entry interface, and that, Dragon's tearing along at 17,500 miles per hour. So I always like talking to the crew afterwards about that return is like. I mean, Mike Fink is a shuttle and a Soyuz veteran, and so now he'll be able to tell us about returning on a Dragon.
Yeah, and for those of you who watched our coverage yesterday, we talked about the shuffling of things for Zena Cardman, who was supposed to, of course, have led the Crew-9 mission, but given the issues with Boeing Starliner spacecraft, got pulled off of that flight and then put on Crew-11 instead. There's also been some shuffling for both NASA astronaut Mike Finke and JAXA astronaut Kimiya Yui. Those two gentlemen were training
Right,
together to be on the first long-duration Starliner mission. And so,
right.
there's an alternate timeline here where, Mike Fink would be able to tell us what it's like to come back on Starliner. Of course, we will have to wait to see what the
Hmm.
return trip on that vehicle is like until at least maybe later this year, potentially not until sometime in 2027 when the next astronauts are allowed to fly on board the Starliner spacecraft. Of course, one of the things that we'll be watching for Gina UI and our colleagues covering the space beat is the timing of the what is deemed the Starliner 1 mission now, which will just be a cargo flight to the space station. That's supposed to fly sometime in the early part
Correct.
of 2026. I don't believe a firm date has been set on that. And we haven't really got a detailed update on all of the testing that's
Yeah.
been going on at White Sands in 2025. It's been a little quiet on the Starliner front, so hopefully we'll get some updated news on that, both on how the testing on the dog houses have gone, the learnings that have come from that, and if NASA and Boeing feel comfortable to fly Starliner, sooner rather than later.
It is. And Starliner, it dominated the news on our beat last year. It was the story of the year, was Starliner safe to return. And, a lot of the people involved in that decision making, Leroy Chow and Steve Stitch, are veterans of the Columbia disaster. And, they had options here that they did not have in Columbia, which is they had a SpaceX Dragon they were confident in, and they had the ability to swap out crews. And so they made the right choice. They made the choice that they felt was right. Crew came home safely, but Boeing has a lot to prove with Starliner. And we'll just see what they do and how the cargo mission goes. If they can pull off a flawless mission, then I think we can expect not too long later to have a crewed mission announced. I don't know who the crew will be. Would Mike Fink want to fly again so soon? I don't know. I mean, those are all issues that we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I guess a lingering question from this whole Crew-11 early return is we don't know who the astronaut is who had the medical
Right.
issue, what the nature of that medical issue was. Could it have been Mike Fink? Maybe. And if it was Mike Fink, is this something that, once they get a full checkup, they decide, well, it was safe for you to return. We made the right call here, but flying again, may not be in the cards. So if that were to happen, then that takes, so far as we're really aware, the American astronauts who have been training for some concerted amount of time down to really just Sonny Williams, who's got a good amount of
Right.
Starliner experience, and then is still left potentially able to fly. And would NASA, given how long she's just been in space, want to put her back in space again? I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know. We shall see. We've watched so many people come and go. I've got a poster up there with the original commercial crew, and I think I'm looking at that poster. Victor Glover and Sonny Williams are the two astronauts who are left from. I'll send you a picture of that later, Will. Their original
Please.
commercial crew poster. Who's still here and who's still in play?
Yeah, no, we have a video up on the channel for folks who want to revisit it, talking about all the various combinations of crew members who were in line to fly the original CFT mission, the crew, demonstration flight test for the Boeing Starliner, and like you mentioned, Gina, from the original announcement, a lot of folks have come and gone. Eric Boe was in the mix at one point, Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada,
Mhm.
um, lots of familiar names to the shuttle program. Hang on
Bob
once.
Benken, yeah, the Bob and
Okay,
Doug crew.
we're getting into the deorbit burn. Let's go ahead and listen in to NASA and SpaceX. And we're just pausing here to allow for audio to come in
As we
from.
await that deorbit burn, which we expect to commence momentarily, just a look at some of the Crew-11 statistics. Their mission will last 167 days by the time they splash down, with 165 days spent on the space station. That means they traveled 2,672 orbits of Earth, which is over 70,856,752 statute miles. We're hearing about 30 seconds until that deorbit burn start. During their time in space, this crew saw a total of 5 arriving vehicles and the departure of 3 vehicles.
Leah Cheshire.
Yes. Yes, I do believe you are correct, Gina.
And right on time, at 2:51 a.m. Eastern Time, we have confirmation that the deorbit burn has begun. This burn is expected to last over 13 minutes. For these return and splashdown operations, the United States Coast Guard, in coordination with SpaceX and NASA, establishes a safety zone to ensure public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, as well as the crew aboard the returning spacecraft. Multiple notices are issued to mariners in advance and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard assets may be deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. We want to again stress to all of the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases risk to the astronauts in the capsule, the teams working to recover them from the water, and the safety of those that come too close. Now, for the safety of the crew and your own safety, we would love for you to continue joining us on NASA Plus and the SpaceX webcast, because you're going to get the best views of our astronauts on their journey home.
Is the Dragon spacecraft now making the start of that?
Like Leah said, the
13
best views will be coming to you here on our webcast. However, if you are in the Los Angeles area, the San Diego area there in Southern California, I do encourage you to step outside about 12:30 a.m. as you might be able to see the spacecraft actually re-entering on its way there back to the splashdown site. And if you're lucky, you might even hear a sonic boom. Now, As always, NASA and SpaceX jointly select our splashdown location, and for today, the primary recovery site is there off of the coast of San Diego. The selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, how much free flight capability that Dragon has for the trip home, and of course, the sleep schedule for the returning crew members. We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for reentry. The time from undock to landing at the primary site can vary from less than 6 hours to more than 39. For Crew-11 this evening, their journey is going to be about 10.5 hours in total. Of course, getting home the quickest comes with some obvious benefits, but we always have to make sure that the crew is properly rested for all these dynamic operations. And of course, that would prevent us from scheduling 20-plus hour days for them. Trajectory and ballistics experts provide the daily opportunities that would line up with the Dragon as it's coming back to the landing zones. And then we split them into what we call ascending and descending opportunities. Okay, so we still have a few minutes left to go here in this deorbit burn. As I mentioned before, this is the transition of the Dragon spacecraft from Earth orbit to atmospheric reentry. This is lining the spacecraft up for its precise splashdown location there off the coast of San Diego. So in a couple minutes, in fact, we expect this deorbit burn to conclude at 12:04 a.m. Pacific time. So we will stand by and await to hear the call for nominal burn. When we hear that, that will confirm completion of this deorbit burn for Dragon Endeavour. As I mentioned earlier, we will hear primarily the SpaceX core or the crew operations and resource engineer. That is the primary role in mission control that is responsible for communicating with the Crew-11 spacecraft. That individual is seated there on the left-hand side of your screen. That is SpaceX Hawthorne Mission Control. Also seated there, I believe I see my boss, SpaceX Vice President Bill Gerstenmaier, sitting there in the front row. This group of operators are standing by and monitoring Dragon's progress throughout this burn. Now, this particular maneuver that Dragon Endeavour is performing, this deorbit burn, is utilizing the 4 forward Draco thrusters. We say forward because that indicates that it's basically the language indicating that they're located at the top of the Dragon spacecraft. These 4 Draco thrusters, this is the last time that they will be utilized for this mission. This deorbit burn will last for a total of about 13.5 minutes. Okay, we still got about 6 minutes left in this deorbit burn. As we wait for a conclusion of the deorbit burn, let's talk about Dragon Endeavour's journey from the space station so far. Shortly after its separation, Dragon used its Draco thrusters to move away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or departure burns, and those were done to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon also executed a phasing burn to lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with its landing location. Following the phasing burns, Dragon is now completing its deorbit, which will be followed by reentry and splashdown. During the deorbit sequence, several things will happen, including trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, as well as deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, ultimately followed by splashdown.
Again, if you're just joining us, this is the live coverage of NASA's SpaceX Crew-11 mission return to Earth. We are currently in the deorbit burn, which started at 1:51 a.m. Central Time, 2:51 a.m. Eastern Time. It's expected to last approximately 13 minutes, so we still have about 4 more minutes left of this burn. Once it's complete, Dragon will then proceed to jettison the trunk before it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, exposing the heat shield on the base of the spacecraft and protecting the crew as they make their way toward the splashdown location. And we are anticipating splashdown at 3:41 a.m. Eastern, 2:41 a.m. Central Time off the coast of California.
All right, we have just over a minute remaining in this 13.5-minute burn. This is the deorbit burn. This is the final burn for the forward Draco thrusters. It is placing Dragon on its final trajectory to the splashdown location off the coast of California. We're targeting one of our 3 pre-designated locations. This one will be just off the coast of San Diego. Shortly after the burn concludes, we should hear a call out indicating that the burn was nominal. This would be good news and letting us know that we are continuing with progression of our milestones. After deorbit burn, we will jettison the trunk and have atmospheric reentry. All right, so there's about 10 seconds left in this burn, so we're going to stand by and listen for that call out.
Dragon SpaceX, deorbit burn complete. Performance nominal. Trunk separation initiated.
Dragon copies. Nominal deorbit burn. Trunk separation process initiated.
Okay, good words there from SpaceX Core, letting our Crew-11 team know that the deorbit burn was as expected. Now, to prepare for these upcoming events, Dragon is currently doing a couple of things autonomously, such as isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon comfortable during the crew's reentry. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate all data, power, and fluid connections between the spacecraft and the trunk, and that is all done in preparation for trunk separation.
Nominal trunk jettison.
Dragon copies.
All right, great news there. We heard the call out for successful trunk separation. So that means that telemetry is looking good. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is exposed and ready for atmospheric entry. Now, since we separated the trunk, we are no longer able to generate any new power, but we don't need to since we're coming on home and Dragon has more than enough battery power already stored. So the next milestone that we have coming up is nose cone closure. We expect that at approximately 12:09 a.m., so here in about 3 minutes. The nose cone is at the top of the spacecraft, and it is the structure that protects the docking system as well as the guidance, navigation, and control system. We'll be using 12 hooks to lock and secure the nose cone prior to its atmospheric entry.
That's right. We are standing by for nose cone closure, expected just a few minutes from now. And as you can tell, things are picking up a little bit more quickly as we prepare for splashdown. Again, expecting that to come at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, 3:41 a.m. Eastern. So right now, Dragon is inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. We just used those to complete the deorbit burn, meaning they will not fire again, and ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone for reentry. The vehicle has, we are also anticipating it to initiate the nitrox suit purge. This helps keep our crew members, Zena Cardman, Mike Finke, Kimiya Yui, and Oleg Platonov, cool and comfortable during reentry, which we're expecting in about 20 minutes. At this point, the nose cone, we are standing by for that closure to begin, protecting that forward hatch for reentry. And the crew will be able to use their screens to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by that set of hooks. Underneath the nose cone is also the hatch that the crew members use to ingress and egress, also known as enter and exit, the International Space Station while the spacecraft was docked. Now, once they splash down, they'll be using the side hatch to exit the spacecraft and onto the recovery ship. That side hatch is what they used to enter Dragon back in August when they launched to the space station.
For those of you that have just recently joined us for Crew-11 Splashdown, we have completed the deorbit burn that set Dragon on its precise trajectory back to our splashdown location off the coast of San Diego, California. We've also jettisoned the trunk, and we've just closed the nose cone. So these are the final physical changes for the Dragon spacecraft prior to its atmospheric entry. And we expect that entry period to begin about 12:30 a.m. Pacific time, so in about 20 minutes or so. We also expect the crew to receive their final entry briefing. This is where the SpaceX core will communicate any changed details, such as timeline shifts to the anticipated loss of signal and acquisition of signal, as well as the entry period. We should also find out what the wave height and wind speed is there at the splashdown location. But when I was coming into work this evening, I did see some stars outside, so hopefully that's a good indication that we've got some smooth seas out there awaiting the crew.
As we await those words from the SpaceX core to the crew, giving them that re-entry briefing, just want to address something in our live chat here. For those who are unfamiliar with why Crew-11 is coming home about a month earlier than originally planned, there was what was described by NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman as a, quote, serious medical concern, which the teams evaluated as best they could last Wednesday, and then early Thursday made the determination, which was announced to the public later that Thursday, a week ago now today, that all of Crew-11, Zena, Cardman, Mike Finke, Kimiya Yui, and Oleg Platonov would be returning early from the station as part of what's called a medical evacuation. So this was not, as NASA officials described, an emergency deorbit from station. They could take a little bit of time to plan, be methodical about it, and target and set up at this essentially nominal reentry operation that we've been seeing unfold for the last roughly hour or so now. And teams will recover the Dragon as they normally would, just on an accelerated timeline. The biggest difference for station operations.
As we are in the process of the hooks and latches driving to secure and close the nose cone, just a recap of what we've seen so far tonight. The spacecraft undocked from the International Space Station earlier today. This Crew-11, spent 165 days aboard the orbiting laboratory, but 167 days in space altogether, if you count the time they have spent getting to and from the space station. At 1:51 a.m. Central Time, 2:51 a.m. Eastern, the spacecraft executed the deorbit burn. That was an approximately 13-minute-long burn, committing the spacecraft to coming home and splashing down off the coast of California. We're anticipating that splashdown in less than 30 minutes from now, 2:41 a.m. Central. After the nose cone closes, we will begin seeing our reentry process, and part of that is a communications blackout. We lose communication with the spacecraft. This is an anticipated and tracked milestone as they go through reentry and plasma builds up around the spacecraft itself. We do regain that communications shortly thereafter, and following that, we anticipate seeing drogue parachutes deployed. There are 2 of those, as well as 4 main parachutes, slowing down the spacecraft to a splashdown time of, again, 2:41 a.m. Central Time. So we're just standing by for confirmation of nose cone closure.
A little bit unclear as to that last comment, as it sounded like just a couple minutes ago SpaceX did confirm that the nose cone was in fact closed. We'll of course continue to monitor and bring you updated words from SpaceX there in Hawthorne, California, or Mission Control Houston at the Johnson Space Center. Just to address again something that we've seen some chatter about in our live chat here. Intentionally, NASA has not disclosed information about the medical concern that affected one of the crew members, which prompted this this medical evacuation, specifically not an emergency deorbit. This is standard policy for NASA that they don't disclose medical information about their personnel, as would be standard across the federal government. So this is not necessarily a unique thing to NASA. It's just that NASA astronauts are obviously significantly more high-profile individuals compared to your standard federal individual that works for the U.S. government here in the States. So, we don't expect to hear specifics about the crew member, the medical condition that happened. We do know that the crew member was and is stable. That happened and was established before crews got into this process of leaving the space station and going through the steps to bring them back home to Earth, where they will have better diagnostic abilities to assess that crew member, whomever they may be, and will address their medical concerns and condition as time goes on back on Earth. So just to put that out there for folks to, respectfully, no one outside of NASA, really knows what's going on. So the speculation in the chat is both not helpful and quite probably inaccurate. So we'll let it be at that. But Gina, we did hear, both verbally from NASA astronaut and Crew-11 pilot Mike Finke in his words during the change of command ceremony, as well as the goodbye from the space station. But he also made a point to post about this whole operation
Dragon SpaceX,
in his
nose
own
cone
words.
secured for entry.
Dragon.
Confirmation to the crew there that the nose cone has been closed and secured.
Okay, we heard good news there. The nose cone is closed and secured, locked in position, ready for atmospheric reentry. Now, as we begin the second half of entry, Dragon has begun to inject cooled nitrox, or nitrogen-oxygen mixture, into the air, being delivered directly into the suits worn by the crew. Again, this is what will allow our crew members to remain comfortable while external temperatures reach up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, the heat shield is pointing forward, essentially leading Dragon to our landing site just off the coast of San Diego, which is important as it will be doing a lot of the work during this reentry. So let's talk a bit more about the heat shield. Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of PICA 3.0, which stands for Phenolic Impregnated Carbon Ablator. Now, the first gen PICA was actually initially developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system. SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop PICA X, which was the second gen product.
Dragon SpaceX for entry briefing. Report when ready to copy.
Ready to copy.
Okay, starting with timeline. We're completely on time per the previously briefed timeline. Splashdown per your displays at 0841 Zulu. Com blackout start 0828. Blackout end 0835. How copy?
Copy, we are on time for 0841 splashdown per the timeline. Com blackout start 0828. Com blackout end 0835.
That's a good readback. We have a nominal vehicle status. We're tracking an on-target arrival to San Diego with pristine weather conditions for splashdown. Recovery team is on site and ready to support.
Dragon copies. Nominal vehicle, excellent weather, and teams are ready to support.
And with that, please report when tablets are secure, restraints are tightened, and visors are down.
SpaceX Dragon, tablets secure, restraints tightened, and visors down.
SpaceX copies all.
All right, so as expected, that was our entry brief to the crew, letting them know that there were actually no updates to the anticipated timeline this morning. So that's great news. Everything is looking well on timed with our anticipated timeline. So as we mentioned before, we expect our anticipated loss of signal to occur around 12:28 a.m. Pacific. So in just about 8 minutes from now, we will have, we anticipate that signal to be regained, or anticipate that signal to be acquired again at 12:35 a.m. Pacific time. Now, sometimes we are able to hail the crew a little bit earlier than that, and sometimes we get those communications back. And then once again, splashdown at 12:41 a.m. Pacific. So again, if you're in Southern California, head outside and look up. Now, let's get back to talking a little bit about the heat shield. As you know, we're talking about this signal loss, and that's due to part of what's going on with that heat shield. So SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop the second generation heat shield product, and that was actually used on all of the Dragon 1 CRS missions that resupplied the space station on 20 missions. Then fast forwarding to Pika 3.0, that was developed specifically for use on Dragon 2 crew and cargo, with enhanced structural and thermal properties that optimized the heat shield and drove down cost and mass. So the remainder of Dragon is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablative material. That's another class of thermal protection, which is lighter weight versus Pika and protects the underlying composite structure during the reentry phase, and that's to ensure the structural capabilities of the spacecraft are maintained. Now, while Dragon will experience temperatures over 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit peak during those peak reentry conditions, the characteristics of the thermal protection systems, or TPS as you hear it called, coupled with the environmental control and life support, or egress, that system pressurized will be pressurizing the interior, and all those combined will ensure that the crew will stay cool and comfortable during all phases of reentry through splashdown.
SpaceX Dragon
Okay, so
opening seat 3 visor just to adjust glasses.
Dragon SpaceX, can you repeat?
Temporarily opening seat 3 visor to adjust glasses.
Copy, adjusting glasses. Your go for that.
Happens to all of us.
Okay, so that was important to note there, because our commander, Zena Cardman, had already reported back that all visors were down and in the locked position ready for atmospheric reentry, but one of our crew members had to adjust their glasses. So she did a good job there in reporting back to SpaceX Crew to let them know that one of the crew members had to reopen momentarily.
Visors are down.
We copy, visors are down. 5 minutes until predicted calm blackout. See you on the other side at 0835.
Copy 0835. Talk to you soon.
Okay, so as we have been saying, everything that Dragon and the crew on board does is carefully choreographed, not just the maneuvers that the spacecraft is executing, but the communications between our crew here on the ground and our crew in space. So, Leah, we can see all of that being perfectly demonstrated with what's going on now.
Absolutely, and we are standing by for the reentry portion when we expect to lose communications with the spacecraft, but we will regain that communication after they have begun re-entering the atmosphere. So once Dragon has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. First will be the 2 drogue chutes, followed by the 4 main chutes to guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since launching in August. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different different pressure and positioning sensors on the spacecraft detect that they are at the right speed and altitude. The spacecraft velocity at drogue deploy is approximately 350 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 18,000 feet. You're getting a live look inside the cabin right now. That's Crew-11 preparing for their reentry period. Again, having spent 165 days aboard the space station, and when they splash down, capping a 167-day mission. Before they can splash down, though, a little bit more about those parachutes. The next that we will see deploy will be the main parachutes. There are 4 of those. They deploy at approximately 119 miles per hour, or I should say when the spacecraft is traveling about 119 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 65,000 feet. And at splashdown, Dragon is traveling approximately 16 miles per hour, which is a pretty good deceleration from the about 17,500 miles per hour that they were traveling while in Earth orbit with the International Space Station. Now, the highest G load the crew will experience during reentry is approximately 3 to 5 Gs, so about 3 to 5 times what we are experiencing right now standing on Earth. This view is over the shoulder of Commander Zena Cardman and pilot Mike Finke of the Crew-11 spacecraft. In this view, you can see their crew displays. They're able to monitor everything happening with the spacecraft. However, all the next milestones should be completely autonomous and hands-off for the crew.
And just as a reminder for folks in California, you want to step outside around 4 minutes from now.
We just heard that the crew is in entry attitude, and we are anticipating losing this view and losing our audio communications with the crew in just a minute or so as they enter this entry interface. They'll be traveling and experiencing heat outside the capsule at approximately 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And as they are traveling and re-entering Earth's atmosphere, a plasma builds up around the capsule that prevents us from communicating back and forth with the crew. We expect to regain communications with them about 7 minutes later, but we're still getting great views right now.
And it's that plasma buildup which will allow folks on the ground in California
I love
to
this view over their shoulders because you can see what our pilot and commander can see. They're continuing to follow along with Dragon's progress. As Leah mentioned, we have designed the spacecraft to be completely autonomous. Dragon is flying itself, so they are able to monitor along with everything that's going on. I also want to momentarily point out on the bottom of your screen there, you have some graphical interfaces there that represent the speed and the altitude. And it looks like we've lost our views there as that, we are now entering the period of anticipated loss of signal. This is where, as Leah mentioned, the plasma is beginning to build up on the exterior of the capsule as we expect. This happens with every spacecraft reentry for Dragon, and so this lasts just a few minutes. But I want to momentarily note that there on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you can actually see something pretty cool where when one of the Draco thrusters ignite to fire and help steer the spacecraft, you will actually see that they're represented on the interface there. Now, the 4 in the middle, those are representing the 4 forward Draco thrusters. We won't see those ignite at all because those were last utilized in the 13-minute deorbit burn that we completed earlier. Those are located under the nose cone, which has been closed, locked, and secured. So everything that you'll be seeing are the thrusters that are located on the side of our spacecraft, and that is enabling Dragon to fly itself home to its pre-flight off the coast of San Diego, California. For about a minute and a half until we have that atmospheric reentry. Once again, if you're in Southern California, head on outside and look up. There's a good chance that you might be able to actually see Dragon streak across the sky, look toward about the north and the west. As we mentioned before, we have entered a communications blackout period, which lasts about 7 minutes due to the plasma formation on the exterior of the capsule. We've got about 5 minutes remaining until we believe we can acquire that signal again. Now, during this time, no vehicle telemetry is received by Mission Control or the recovery team, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. But like I was saying, Dragon is designed to fly itself. During this reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from its orbital velocity of about 17,500 miles per hour. And it's slowing down. The atmosphere is really doing a lot of the work in conjunction with that heat shield to dispel that velocity. That results in heat, and that is why we have this plasma building up on the exterior of the spacecraft. It'll slow down to about 350 miles per hour, thanks to thanks to the heat shield and the atmosphere. And so at that point, we'll deploy the drogue parachutes. But during reentry, the top temperature that Dragon experiences will be about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So pretty warm on the outside, but there is cool nitrox air being flowed through the suits that each crew member is wearing. So we ensure that they remain comfortable during this brief journey through the atmosphere.
Just a little past the bottom of the hour now. The planned communications blackout should be ending in about 4 minutes, if not slightly sooner. At this point in time, we're roughly 10 minutes away from splashdown as well, and the drogue parachutes will deploy about 4 minutes before anticipated splashdown, followed by the mains about a minute or so later, which will bring the crew to a slowed down, gentle descent to the waters of the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego. And not too far away, the Dragon recovery vessel Shannon is waiting. Of course, the fast boats will come in to intercept the Dragon, make sure that the situation is safe for other crews to approach, and then the recovery vessel Shannon will start to make its approach before the Dragon spacecraft is hoisted on board the back into what SpaceX calls the nest, the Dragon nest, where it'll be cradled and
now,
slowly
while
brought
we
forward.
await AOS or acquisition of signal, let's go through a brief recap of today's events. Hatch closure took place at 2:29 p.m. Central Time after all 4 crew members floated into Dragon for their ride home. They took time to configure the spacecraft cabin, put on their suits, and get seated ahead of undocking, which occurred at 4:20 p.m. Central. Dragon's departure burns helped move it out of the keep-out sphere and approach ellipsoid, which are both invisible boundaries we monitor around the space station. Since then, we completed the deorbit burn at 1:51. Oh, and you're getting your first views of reentry. This is live, and if you're in California, you can go see this with your own eyes. This is Crew-11 re-entering after 167 days in space. Again, we are in a loss of signal period. This is a tracked period as the spacecraft re-enters Earth's atmosphere. We anticipate regaining signal with Crew-11 momentarily, and when the spacecraft reaches an altitude of 18,000 feet above Earth, 2 drogue chutes will deploy to slow it down ahead of the 4 main parachutes deploying at 6,000 feet in altitude. Now, splashdown will be the milestone we will see after that, which is expected for 2:41 a.m. Central Time. So again, we're standing by for acquisition of signal and continued communication with Crew-11, expecting that just a few minutes from now.
Dragon SpaceX, comm check.
Dragon, loud and clear.
We have you the same, loud and clear. Expect automated chute deployment.
Copy, automated chute deploy expected.
All right, so there we heard that we had confirmation of that acquisition of signal, or AOS. It actually came in a minute early, so that's good news there. We heard the Corps inform the crew to expect drogue parachute deployment that happens when Dragon senses the right speed and altitude. So that's roughly about 350 miles per hour and around 18,000 feet in altitude. There we have a view from...
GPS converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
Dragon copies, expecting nominal altitude.
So we'll have that drogue deploy in about a minute from now, but we have our first views from the WB-57. This is a high-altitude tracking plane that is providing these thermal signatures via infrared. This is really cool to see here as we continue to track Dragon on its way back to planet Earth. So momentarily, we expect for visual and...
Brace for drogue window.
Drogue brace.
Dragon has safed the propulsion system as we anticipate drogue deployment any moment now. Drogue parachutes are utilized to stabilize and decelerate the vehicle further prior to deployment of the main parachutes. Drogue should be deploying here in a couple seconds, and mains will follow in about 1 minute. There we have visual confirmation of drogue deploy.
Visual, 2 healthy drogues.
Kind of a cool
Dragon
shot.
copies.
I think we had the recovery vessel in the background there just momentarily. Main parachutes deploying in about 20 seconds. The main parachutes deploy when the vehicle is about 119 miles per hour and around 6,000 feet. There we can see visual confirmation of deployment of the 4 mains.
Visual, 4 healthy mains.
These main parachutes help decelerate the spacecraft even further. So they deploy around 119 miles per hour, and they'll decelerate it down to about 15, 16 miles per hour. And that will be the speed in which the spacecraft is traveling upon splashdown. Once again, we're anticipating splashdown at 12:41 a.m.
Meters.
Copy, 1,000.
We'll now begin to hear Crew-11 Commander Zena Cardman call out the altitude from her seat there in Dragon Endeavour. SpaceX's mission control team in Hawthorne continues to report the precise landing coordinates to the recovery team.
800.
Copy, 800.
Those main parachutes now fully reefed or inflated. We ensure that the parachutes inflate over a few seconds to help reduce the shock to the system.
600 meters.
Copy, 600.
All around great views of Dragon Endeavour as it continues its way back to Earth.
Copy, 400. Crew are braced.
Standing by for splashdown. Splashdown of Crew-11. After 167 days in space, Dragon and NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Mike Finke, Kimiya Yui of JAXA, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov are back on Earth.
Dragon, SpaceX, we see splashdown.
SpaceX Dragon, copy, concur. Splashdown and mains are cut. We are in 4.800.
SpaceX copies, and we see the same. Mains cut. On behalf of SpaceX and NASA, welcome home, Crew-11.
SpaceX Dragon, it's so good to be home. With deep gratitude to the teams who got us there and back.
Vehicle safety verifications in progress. We'll report back when recovery personnel are en route.
Dragon copies.
Again, we have splashdown of NASA's SpaceX Crew-11 mission, a 167-day mission, 165 of those being spent on board the International Space Station, now splashing down off the coast of California. That splashdown coming right on time at 2:41 a.m. Central Time. The SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon splashdown, and they will now begin making their way to the splashdown location. It looks like we even have a couple of visitors around the spacecraft. If you look very closely, you might even see some dolphins. Again, a return by the books for Crew-11, having splashed down at 2:41 a.m. Central Time off the coast of California. We will now begin moving into the recovery process. We'll see the boats begin to approach and inspect the spacecraft by checking for hypergol and other ordnance checks. They will begin to rig the spacecraft and prepare it to be lifted on that recovery ship. And this is a great view of some of those boats that go out and check the spacecraft. They are going to be sniffing it, essentially, for these hazardous fuels that can linger once the spacecraft has re-entered Earth's atmosphere.
SpaceX Dragon, 4.800, Section 3. We are in Stable 1.
SpaceX copies. Stable 1.
That's the voice of NASA astronaut and commander of Crew-11, Zena Cardman, reporting back that they are working through their procedures and that the capsule is in stable 1, which is the position that you see on your screen here, where it is upright in the water. This is just what we were hoping for, and again, it's been a completely nominal and by-the-books return for the crew today. This is a live view of Crew-11 aboard Dragon from the SpaceX recovery vehicle, or from the SpaceX recovery ship. And this day for the crew started about 10.5 hours ago when they undocked from the International Space Station. SpaceX
Dragon,
recovery
SpaceX.
teams have been given the go to approach.
SpaceX is go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in 1 minute.
Copy, 1 minute. Thank you.
And you just heard that call out from the Corps in Hawthorne, California, to the crew aboard Dragon that the SpaceX personnel who have been in the general vicinity of Dragon's anticipated splashdown location now have the go to approach the spacecraft and begin that recovery process.
All right, so as we heard, we are now standing by for recovery of the Dragon Endeavour spacecraft with NASA astronaut Zena Cardman and Mike Finke, Kimiya Yui of JAXA, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov, who are inside that spacecraft that you see there. Now, Dragon has already, I would also like to point out, we've got some folks here approaching the spacecraft now that they have gotten the okay for the approach. They're on some fast boats there. This is the SpaceX recovery team. Personally, one of my favorite teams to work with here at SpaceX. They're a really scrappy crew, and they're going to work really quickly here to get the Crew-11 team out of the water. And it's always a lot of fun to watch these operations proceed. Now, Dragon has already autonomously completed several steps to safe itself following splashdown. For those of you that perhaps just joined us, the return has gone very smoothly so far, as Leah had mentioned. The Dragon successfully splashed down off the coast of San Diego, California at 12:41 a.m. Pacific time, 3:41 a.m. Eastern time. Approximately 10.5 hours prior to splashdown, Dragon autonomously undocked from the International Space Station, completed a series of departure burns, jettisoned its trunk section, and performed its final burn, which was the deorbit burn. And that placed itself on a trajectory toward Southern California, specifically off the coast of San Diego. So Dragon successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, followed by deployment of its parachutes to slow the spacecraft down to a gentle splashdown. So we're now going to follow the final part of the crew's journey as the Dragon spacecraft is lifted out of the water and placed on the recovery boat. So we see here the recovery team beginning to prepare. One of the most important steps will be to
Dragon SpaceX, hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks, nominal. Rigging in progress, approximately 25 minutes until capsule lift. Stand by for PMC. The next call you hear will be from SpaceX flight surgeon on Dragon to ground private.
Dragon copies. 25 minutes until lift. Standing by for PMC.
All right, we heard there that the crew will have an opportunity for a private medical conference with the flight surgeon. That is standard for all of our crew returns. That will be done on a private channel. Great view here from the drone. This is our first look at the front side of Dragon Endeavour. I love this view because you can see the lights on the inside. This crew member here is actually on the capsule, beginning to place the rigging required for the lift onto the large recovery vessel. This takes a few minutes to essentially lasso and wrangle the Dragon capsule as it gently bobs there in the water.
And of course, we'll continue to monitor for future comments from SpaceX and NASA and bring those to you live. But Gina, Dragon down in the water, it's being
Not in
lassoed
the picture.
as we speak.
There is another fast boat that is recovering the parachutes from the water. Those were automatically cut or released from Dragon upon splashdown, and we retrieved those from the water. This fast boat here is helping to assist the rigging of the required straps and equipment for the spacecraft recovery.
And as we heard, there will be private communication between the Dragon capsule now and the SpaceX flight surgeon, which is standard for all missions. But Gina, of course, especially pertinent here is this is the first medical evacuation. The reason that they're coming home early is for a medical reason.
Dragon, SpaceX, Dragon to ground is no longer privatized.
Dragon copy.
Now that's
well, we
wrapped up.
just heard, we just heard Zena
Yeah.
Cardman. No, you're right. Normally, I mean, as you said, this is routine that they have the private medical conference, but
SpaceX
it's
recovery team
significant now.
continues to maneuver around Dragon Endeavour as we continue progress of placing the recovery straps required in order to safely lift the spacecraft out of the water.
Particularly significant now because we know that this was a medical evacuation flight.
You can go ahead, Gina.
We knew it was a medical evacuation flight, not an emergency flight, but a medical evacuation flight. So we perhaps read more into routine medical conferences. But, they want to know, how does the crew feel?
Yeah, no, this is, as you mentioned, Gina, standard for operation procedures for recovering the Dragon. Will be, good to know that they've just had a brief conference with the folks on board Dragon, obviously on the private channels, as is standard protocol. What'll be most interesting to watch as the next few hours unfold, though, is once Dragon is brought aboard, the recovery vessel Shannon and the 4 crew members are able to egress from Dragon Endeavour. Where they go next, if they will be making, once they're back on land, do they go directly back to the Johnson Space Center? Will whichever crew member had the issue that caused this mission to end early go to a hospital for most immediate evaluation? We've been told that they are in stable conditions, so it maybe is not an emergent situation for them to be seen as quickly as possible. But obviously the fact that they came home early in the first place means that there's some time sensitivity to how soon they want to make sure that they can get a full diagnostic read-up on whomever suffered whatever the medical malady may be.
And we know that 6 months in space still takes recovery time. It's different for every astronaut. Some have told me for every day in space, it took a day to recover from being in space. They haven't been walking, so the soles of their feet are particularly tender. They don't have much balance at this moment. Earth feels funny to them. So there is recovery even if you're perfectly healthy. So would they prefer to have the astronauts back here at the Johnson Space Center to to assess their condition. It is once you're an astronaut, you are a lifetime medical guinea pig for them. Astronauts come back every year to be tested. We know the Kelly brothers actually are a test, Mark and Scott, because they were twins, and Scott spent a year in space. So they want to know exactly how these astronauts' bodies react from that time in space.
Yeah, and in fact, before Crew-11 launched, Zena Cardman, the commander of the Crew-11 mission, made a point to note that she was participating in this larger astronaut health study called Cypher. So, her process of, going through space flight, coming back to Earth, reacclimating to one gravity environment, all of that's going to be going into this larger data set so that NASA and its partners can get a better understanding of what happens to our physiology as we spend longer and longer periods of time in space. Since, as this administration has made clear, and past ones have as well, that we want to create a more enduring presence and go deeper into space to places like the moon for long stretches of time, and eventually on to Mars and perhaps beyond as well. So, the more we can understand about what happens in the radiation environment of low Earth orbit, and of course, with missions like Artemis 2, that will teach us a lot more about, that deep space environment on board the Orion spacecraft. Those will all be important mile markers for human exploration. Just bringing back to the live pictures we're seeing right now, you can see the Dragon Endeavour being pulled on into the Shannon recovery vessel. Now that it has been lassoed, it's got the nest that you see right there. That's the sort of circular padded section on the recovery vessel. We'll see the crane lowered down and then a hoist Dragon. It'll be airborne for a couple of minutes as they lower it into the correct position. And then you can see the rails that are on the Shannon recovery vessel along leading up to the nest there. That will be pulled forward, and then there's a bridge just adjacent off screen where the astronauts will be safely helped out of their Dragon spacecraft onto the recovery vessel. Now, the only time that we've actually seen astronauts do this egressing without the help, super directly of SpaceX personnel was last year when Fram 2 came back, and that was part of the
Yes.
science that they were doing, was to see, okay, we only spent 3 days in space. How easily are we able to get our own selves out of our spacecraft? And it's little things like that that will also help inform future learning, since, when astronauts eventually land on the surface of Mars, they're not going to have, a SpaceX team to help them out and get them acclimated. They're going to have to do a lot on their own, barring some, sci-fi future where we've got a team of humanoid and other robots to be personal assistants on the Martian surface. But more than likely, it'll be, humans, doing it themselves, the crew that will arrive to Mars someday.
And we've seen proof of that. You were here for the Artemis opportunities that Johnson Space Center gave us last year. And we've seen astronauts come back from space and immediately be launched, put into a harness like a day later, attempting a lunar spacewalk. So this is part of the testing process to determine, if, say, it takes you a couple of weeks to get someplace, what would your capability and your ability be when you landed on the moon? And then Mars, as we all know, is a different story.
Yeah, that's just going to be a whole other kettle of fish, if you will, landing on Mars. There's a lot that we still don't know about how all that will practically work, but these precursor Artemis missions will hopefully teach the astronauts a lot, teach NASA a lot, and obviously the international partners that are party to these Artemis missions, like JAXA, ESA, and others.
I wish I'd gotten a screen grab of that dolphin. We had a dolphin greet the crew.
A nice little throwback to the Crew-9 recovery that we saw last year.
Mm-hmm.
As a reminder to folks, coming up later on this morning, while this is the end of things for the recovery of the crew themselves, we are expecting to hear from NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, who will be leading a post-splashdown press briefing that's coming up at, Gina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's still on track for a start at
For
4:45
4:45
Central Time.
or 5:45 Eastern, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we'll of course be
Yeah.
listening to
I'll have
that.
to head over to that. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
In
And we'll,
about, yeah, probably in about 15 minutes. It's not a long commute to the other side.
yeah, for those who are unaware watching our stream right now, Gina is currently at the Johnson Space Center, not too far away from where the uh, media briefing room is located. So she'll be uh, approximate to the room where Administrator Isaacman and others will be giving an overview of the operations that we're seeing now, close to wrapping up. But obviously, Dragon is still in the waters off the coast of San Diego right now. It still needs to be hoisted on board the Shannon recovery vessel. And you can actually see in this view that upper deck that I was mentioning on the recovery vessel. You can see at least one, maybe like 2 or 3 SpaceX personnel up there that are waiting the crew to help them egress from the Dragon spacecraft. Of course, they've got medical personnel, and the first person in the capsule will do another quick assessment of the crew's health and condition to make sure that they are good to proceed into the egressing operations. And then they'll get another quick medical evaluation on board the deck of the Shannon recovery vessel before they're helicoptered back to port, and then we will see where they go next. Again, if the crew member will need to go to the hospital immediately, or will have a little bit of time before they need to get checked out more thoroughly. Got some good visuals of the divers who've been helping out with this recovery operation, the fast boat making another lap around the Dragon. It's a very calm water situation here tonight, which is, of course, exactly what NASA and SpaceX want to see with a recovery operation. You know, the choppier the water, the more difficult all of this becomes. So, as smooth as conditions as possible is part of how NASA and SpaceX plan the timing for undocking and splashdown when they're looking at recovering, especially a Crew Dragon spacecraft, but also cargo Dragon vehicles as well. As the Dragon spacecraft is now making its final approach to the Shannon recovery vessel, let's go ahead and bring back up SpaceX audio here and listen in for the next events and milestones of the Crew-11 recovery.
You can't really see the full size of the hydraulic lift or hoist there at the aft end of the recovery vessel, but it's pretty big and pretty strong. So we're able to lift the spacecraft out of the water. We can see there that the lines, the guidelines are attached, and they're going to line everything up here for the final approach and ultimately the lift into the nest there located at the back of the vessel. So we can see Dragon Endeavour. The gap is closing between Dragon Endeavour and our recovery vessel Shannon. Once again, we had an on-time splashdown off the coast of San Diego, California, that occurred at 12:41 a.m. Pacific time. All 4 crew members of Crew-11 are still in our Dragon spacecraft. Moments ago, when the spacecraft was turned the other way, we could actually see
Dragon SpaceX, rigging complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Dragon copies. 5 minutes to lift.
All right, good call out there. Just keeping the crew there inside Dragon Endeavour apprised of the timeline. While there are windows, it is a little hard to see exactly everything that's going on outside of those windows at this point, as there is quite a bit of action as we have been following along. We can see now that the hydraulic lift has been extended into the initial lifting position. And this is the mechanism that will bring Dragon out of the water and onto the nest there at the back of the recovery vessel. We'll also see the recovery team member. I think you can still, yeah, you can still see them there on the front. They're actually standing in the bay where the main parachutes are stored. That's quite a large bay. Now they're climbing up to the top, and shortly we'll see them make some final adjustments and a final graceful flying departure from Dragon Endeavour.
Brace for capsule lift.
Crew bracing.
Now, as you can see, the recovery teams are preparing to lower the vessel's hydraulic lift mechanism, and that's going to bring the spacecraft into the on-deck translation system, also known as the nest. Dragon will remain in the nest during crew extraction and then for the journey back to port. Again, all of this coming right after splashdown at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, right on time, and a really expedient recovery, partially thanks to the calm sea states and great weather that is out in the San Diego area right now, but also due to the swift and very well skilled and practiced efforts of the NASA and SpaceX recovery teams. The spacecraft is now being lifted. It'll be set on the nest and centered. It'll be oriented so that the side hatch is facing forward for the crew to egress. It'll be moved into the hangar underneath that helipad that you see illuminated in green on the top of the ship, and then pulled towards the mezzanine area so that the crew can be helped outside of the hatch. Once open, a SpaceX medical doctor will be the first to check in on Cardman. Finke, Yui, and Platonov, our Crew-11 crew members, and see if they're ready for egress or exiting the vehicle. This is a standard procedure for all of our crew returns. This view coming from the recovery vessel, as you see Dragon, and at the very bottom, that is the nest in which we were discussing, and that's where Dragon will remain now and all the way back to port. You can also see, facing forward, that is Dragon's side hatch we were discussing. This is the same hatch they used to enter the spacecraft on launch day in August. And of course, this is different from the top hatch. You can not see that because it's underneath the nose cone at the very top of the spacecraft. We've been following along all the way through deorbit burn and nose cone closure tonight. That top hatch underneath the nose cone is what the astronauts and cosmonaut used to enter and exit the International Space Station while Dragon was docked. So before we open this side hatch, the spacecraft's cabin pressure must be equalized with the outside environment. And of course, once that hatch is open, this will be the crew's first breath of fresh air back on Earth since boarding their spacecraft at the start of their journeys back in August. Again, a very by-the-book return for Crew-11 tonight. Everything nominal, as we often use, meaning it's normal and as planned and as expected. Splashdown happening at 2:41 a.m. Central. This swift recovery getting them on the boat. It's now 3:10 a.m. Central.
Dragon SpaceX, welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing their final checks and stand by for translation to the egress platform.
Dragon copies.
Now that voice speaking with the astronauts and cosmonaut on the Dragon spacecraft is still coming from the core in SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. These team members are making sure that all thrusters are covered before they begin to maneuver the spacecraft toward that egress platform. We'll be standing by live the entire time. This is the 6th flight of this spacecraft. In all, Endeavour has flown 9 NASA astronauts, 3 visitors to the International Space Station, 2 Roscosmos cosmonauts, 1 retired NASA astronaut, 1 ESA astronaut, and an Emirati astronaut from the UAE to and from the International Space Station. Again, this is the 6th mission for this Dragon spacecraft named Endeavour. First launching on May 30th, 2020 to the International Space Station. And if you remember that date, that was the historic Demo 2 mission for the Commercial Crew Program, carrying NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. What you're seeing here are SpaceX team members. They are preparing the vehicle to be moved to that egress platform, making sure everything is safe, that the rigging is properly attached. This is really the final ride on Dragon for these Crew-11 crew members. One short trip to this egress platform, and then they'll begin being assisted out of the spacecraft. Completely normal procedures for all of our returns. And this is a live view from Mission Control in Houston, Texas, the International Space Station Flight Control Room. We have some additional visitors beyond the usual flight controllers and flight directors that staff this room 24/7. In the center of your screen, you'll see NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman speaking with team members, specifically right now the Spartan flight controller. Isaacman is, of course, an accomplished astronaut himself, having flown on 2 missions aboard Dragon, so he is familiar with these procedures and what the crew might be experiencing right now. Back on the recovery ship, the teams continue to prepare to move Dragon to that egress platform. We'll get ready to officially welcome home the Crew-11 astronauts and cosmonaut. Again, that's NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Mike Finke, JAXA's astronaut Kimiya Yui and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov, wrapping up a 167-day in space for these crew members. Again, if you're just joining us, thanks for tuning in. This is the live mission coverage of NASA's SpaceX Crew-11 mission returning from the International Space Station back to Earth. As you can see, this is the Dragon spacecraft, and splashdown occurred at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, right on time. This crew undocked at 4:20 p.m. Central Time, so it was about a 9.5-hour ride from space back to Earth. They wrapped up 165 days aboard the International Space Station, 167 days in total for this mission. And we are seeing motion for Dragon. They are pulling it to the egress platform. It's a short distance, and this view coming from that platform itself. This will align it properly with the side hatch, where we will see the astronauts egress or exit the capsule. They will be assisted after being checked on by a medical doctor, and this is standard procedure for all of our returning crews. We are getting confirmation that the spacecraft hatch is ready to be
Dragon
opened. Again, this will be the first time.
for side hatch opening and egress. It's been an honor flying with you.
Standing by for side hatch, and the honor is ours. Thank you so much.
Good words from the Corps in SpaceX Mission Control to the crew. Again, with this side hatch open, this is the first breath of fresh air that this crew has gotten in 167 days since their launch back in August. That hatch opening coming at 3:19 a.m. Central Time, and with a splashdown occurring at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, a pretty rapid access of the crew. As previously discussed, the first team member to check on the crew is a SpaceX medical doctor, just giving them a once-over, making sure everyone's feeling all right and ready to exit the spacecraft. This is something we do with all crew members who return. And getting a quick picture inside the capsule is NASA photographer Bill Ingalls. Hey, there's your live view inside Dragon Crew-11 back on Earth after 167 days in space. Again, next on the checklist for tonight is crew egress or exit. Team members will be assisting them as they are helped out of the spacecraft. Again, it's been 167 days since they were back on Earth, so our standard procedure will be followed here as well, where they are assisted out of the spacecraft and placed on essentially a gurney, and then they will receive some medical checks aboard the ship before flying back to land. Team members inside the spacecraft from SpaceX's recovery team are helping remove some of those extra items that are in the spacecraft. You just saw the footrests being handed off. This will just make it easier for us to bring the crew out of the spacecraft. Just over 40 minutes since our crew splashed down off the coast of San Diego. Again, that coming at 2:41 a.m. Central Time. We are expecting to see them exiting the spacecraft very soon. That's the chair the crew members will be helped into. and moved back for their initial medical checks. Again, standard procedure for any returns on Dragon, as well as any of our crew members returning. If you've ever watched a crew return on a Soyuz spacecraft, we have a similar process where astronauts are carried from the capsule to waiting chairs and then carried again to a nearby medical tent. Again, you're watching live coverage of Crew-11's mission and return from the International Space Station, having undocked at 4:20 p.m. Central Time on January 14th, just yesterday, and splashing down at 2:41 a.m. Central Time today, January 15th. We are now just awaiting the crew to be helped out of the spacecraft. And it looks like our first crew member out of the spacecraft is NASA astronaut Mike Finke. Yes, that's the pilot of the Crew-11 mission aboard Dragon. Finke now being taken to those standard medical checks. And since we just saw Mike Finke, it's worth noting he now has 549 total days in space. That's the fourth all-time most days for NASA astronauts. Standing by for our next crew member to exit the spacecraft. That's NASA astronaut Zena Cardman, wrapping up her first mission to space, commander of the Crew-11 spacecraft. That's another footrest being handed out of the capsule, and we'll be standing by to see who is next to be brought out of the spacecraft. Again, you see them being helped onto these stretchers. They are being escorted back to their routine medical checks. Our next crew member to exit the spacecraft is JAXA's astronaut Kimiya Yui. Yui just reached the milestone of 300 days in space across 2 missions. You can see some cheering on the SpaceX recovery ship, and you can probably also hear a little bit of celebration here in Mission Control Houston as well. That's another foot restraint, or a foot rest, I should say, being brought out of the spacecraft, clearing the way for our final crew member to exit, and that will be Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov. And we see the fourth crew member of Crew-11 being helped from the vehicle now. That is Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov, also wrapping up his first mission to space. Now that NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Mike Finke, Kimiya Yui of JAXA, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the medical teams, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. This crew's journey concludes following a launch on August 1st, 2025, aboard a Falcon 9 rocket to the International Space Station. It was the fourth flight for Finke, who now has 549 days in space, the second for Yui with 309 days in space, and the first flight for Cardman and Platonov, who now have 167 days in space.
And with the finale of the egress of the 4 members of Crew-11, that will bring things to an end for this historic and up to now unprecedented medical evacuation from the International Space Station. All 4 of them, NASA astronaut and commander Zena Cardman, fellow NASA astronaut Mike Finke, as well as JAXA astronaut mission specialist Kimiya Yui, and final member out of crew Dragon Endeavour, Oleg Platonov, all safely back on Earth and going through those initial checkouts. You're looking live now at the International Space Station, where they're back down to 3 crew members on board, 2 cosmonauts and 1 lone American, Chris Williams, holding down the U.S. segment solo until Crew-12 arrives next month. Gina, we'll hear from Administrator Isaacman and presumably others coming up in about an hour from now, but your final thoughts here as we wrap up our coverage on the splashdown of Crew-11.
Well, I mean, we did get our dolphin appearance, so that was a little lovely surprise. But again, NASA emphasized the importance of taking care of the crew. They had options. They could bring this crew home early, not terribly early. This mission was cut short about a month, and they had another Crew-12, in the wings, ready to go. So the question will be, when will Crew-12 launch? On the 15th, or will NASA move that launch up to bring the space station back up to full staffing? We'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely. And, as we've been talking about, looming in the background of all of this is the Artemis 2 mission, which right now has its earliest opportunity scheduled for February 6th. So obviously, with rollout of the rocket from the vehicle assembly building here in Florida coming up this Saturday morning, that's when it starts. We'll have to wait and see how the subsequent wet dress rehearsal tanking test goes and when NASA is able to put that launch officially and firmly on the calendar, and how close to Crew-12 that might be if these 2 missions are going to happen both in early February, which would be quite extraordinary for the Kennedy Space Center to have both a Falcon with a Crew Dragon spacecraft in the wings at the same time that SLS and Orion are awaiting flight. It's going to be a jam-packed, whether they both go in February or, Artemis 2 slips a little bit further out. We shall have to wait and see. But want to thank you, Gina, for being with us. And for those unfamiliar, Gina is CBS News' Houston-based correspondent, joining us live from the Johnson Space Center. Gina, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And want to thank our moderators in the live chat who've been helping us out throughout the course of this coverage, to Jeff Hansen, Mark Otto, and Aussie Space Girl for being with us, as well as Cumulus Granatus, one of our channel members, for helping to answer folks' questions in the chat throughout the course of this morning, as well as yesterday's undocking coverage. Big thanks as well to our Spacefly Now editor, Stephen Young, who's been running the technical operations of this broadcast. Most importantly, though, thanks to you at home for watching, and congratulations to those of you who were able to spot the Crew-11 contingent coming home as they made their way to a splashdown safely off the coast of California. Again, we're awaiting the administrator of NASA to give a briefing in about 1 hour. We'll have that over on our 24/7 live stream, Launchpad Live, so you can follow along with the very latest wrapping up this Crew-11 medical evacuation. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. Until then, bye-bye.